From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
What do they say about death and taxes? Well, of course, there's a lot more in between that sadly is guaranteed, including that we're all going to get older and at some point we're going to need somebody to help us through our daily lives. Australia's aged care system is one that has had many reviews, many inquiries, billions of dollars and too many promises to fix. There was even a Royal Commission a few years ago into how we could improve the system. We've even changed a government because, in part, remember the promise that this bloke made before the last election about how he'd fixed aged care?
24/7 nurses. 24/7 nurses. 24/7. 24/7 nurses. Nurses 24/7. 24/7 nurses. 24/7. Nurse in a nursing home 24/7. 24/7. Put the nurses back in the nursing homes 24/7.
But as we have told you multiple times, that's not happening. The promise was that it would happen by October. It's now November. It hasn't happened. Again, imagine Tony Abbott saying, I'm going to stop the boats, but he didn't stop the boats. Well, there would be an outcry because it's a fairly core promise. But as we've shown multiple times on multiple issues, the media have no interest in holding this government to account. But I'll park the failures of this government to one side and get back to the central issue, which is that all of us deserve the final years of our life to be ones of dignity. Now, obviously, our bodies will slowly but surely let us down, and maybe our mind will let us down before our bodies. But our heart and our soul will, of course, beat until the day that we pass. Our families want us to be comfortable, and you deserve to be comfortable after the long, productive, hard life that you live as a normal, everyday person. I mention all of this today because, guess what? The problem is just as bad today as it was before the last election, before the Aged Care Royal Commission, and before the tens of billions of dollars that have been spent, let alone people having to go all in financially to be taken care of in their final years. We learned today of yet another report that tells us how, yet again, tens of thousands of people are being let down in the final years of their life. Now, this is not an attack on the aged care workers. We all know the work that they do. But it absolutely is on the failures of government and many of the private companies who find ways to cut costs as opposed to taking care of the people who may well have invested every cent they ever had into how they'd be taken care of in the final years of their life. We learned today from the Older Persons Advocacy Network that they have received 36,900 reports of how the system is failing. Now remember, this is just one organisation, and that's a football stadium of people who found it bad enough to complain. As the papers say today, it is a heartbreaking insight into how our most vulnerable are being treated. And as I've often talked about on this show, of all of the isms, like sexism and racism, there is such little attention to ageism. We know about the discrimination that older workers face, and when I mean older workers, I mean people in their 50s, about being able to have anywhere near the same career that they could 20 years earlier, as businesses either seek to pay people less or younger managers try to move the old guard on because perhaps they're not woke enough. But the ageism that is obvious is that this story should have been somewhere near the start of your 6 p.m. news tonight, but it was considered not interesting enough. There will be no one wearing special ribbons or a special day, or someone trying to fight ageism on Instagram, or dare I even say TikTok right now, because again, it's just apparently the way things go. But let's have a look at these 36, nearly 37,000 complaints about the aged care system in Australia. The complaints included being left sitting in soiled clothing for hours, people being denied timely medical care for festering wounds. In one case, an elderly person went without a shower for 4 weeks because the provider could not find 2 staff to assist. 4 weeks without a shower. More than half of the reports, and this is the interesting thing, More than half of the reports involve those with a home care package. So people's complaints are not about aged care facilities as such. It's almost 50-50 now about the care that they are getting in their home as well as the care in a facility that clearly is failing. More than half of the reports involve those with the home care packages, including some paying for services they did not receive, while a third related to residential care homes. To make it nice and simple, look at this graph. You can see that the colours of red and orange, let's say, well, they represent the red, residential aged care, and home care represents the orange. Complaints are basically the same, that the failures that we used to say were only happening in an aged care facility are now happening at home as well. And for obvious reasons, all of us want to stay in our home for as long as possible, but there are huge failures that are clearly taking place about the type of care that people are getting in their home. Now, this care, as you know, is not cheap. It is not cheap if you have to pay for it yourself, and it is definitely not cheap to the taxpayer if you can't. But bring the graphic up again, because I want you to see, again, the areas of concern that people have. Now, the biggest area there is about the care delivery. The second part of the complaints are the financial ones, and there, home care gets more complaint than institutional care. Getting access to care is something that a lot of people are complaining about, again, about home care. When we talk about things like decisions or even abuse, there seems to be an obvious problem there in aged care facilities as opposed to what is happening at home. But have a look at that. In terms of complaints, it doesn't seem that there's much difference about being in a facility versus being at home. The 37,000 complaints included somebody who couldn't have a shower for 4 weeks, let alone all of the other things that we have sadly got too used to about all of this. Now, I'm not here pretending to have the solution, but I wanted you to see that I acknowledge the problem. And I know how difficult it has probably been for you when it came to your parents, or you when it was your kids and you had to have these discussions, when you had to make these decisions. Well, there's another bit of news that, again, should have been a lot more prominent today, and that is who pays and how much for aged care. Now, I understand if we're making a decision in 20 years from now, so people that are in their 40s and 50s might be able to change their financial arrangements. But there's a chance that this could change as soon as next year in the federal budget. And put simply, if you are a person who has been lucky enough to buy a house at the right time and seen the suburb lift in its value as you've taken care of the lawns, kept everything clean, renovated here and there, taken care of the garden, redone the carport or many of other things that have helped with the value of that house. It now seems that the value of your home is going to be a determination that the federal government is going to start to make decisions about how much you pay on your own versus how much help you get from the institution that you have paid tax to your entire life. Today, a report was released on the behalf of the Albanese government. Let me read as it was described in the Financial Review. The Albanese government has all but confirmed that those with greater means will pay more for their aged care, including through the use of tailored superannuation products, under changes to be incorporated in the next budget in May. Now, again, let me explain how this works. Now, again, for many people, when it comes to their aged care, you have to sell the house because that amount of money is what you need to put in as the ongoing fee to an aged care facility. For some people, they're able to take some of the money from their superannuation and put it into the home care situation. But essentially what they are now starting to talk about tinkering with here is a system where all of your money will end up being absorbed by the aged care system, and you'll have very little of it to hand on to the family members that you have always assumed would at one point in your life, the end of your life, be the beneficiaries of your hard work and your financial smarts during your life. Again, this continues. Financial products to assist with wealth will be one of the options. What does this mean? It means that, again, superannuation, access, how it gets doled out and how much is in your fund is going to help determine whether you pay for it all or whether the government pays nothing. As part of its deliberations, the body that has given advice to the government, that seemingly the government is willing to accept according to the take from the Financial Review, as part of its deliberations on user pays, the task force has discussed lifting the $193,000 means test threshold on the family home, meaning the 193 threshold test, which is used to test for daily care that applies in aged care facilities, as a resident has $400,000 or $4 million, the expectation is that all of those will be pushed to a difficult place. Now, I don't know exactly what the number's going to be, so I apologise for the anxiety that many of you may be feeling watching this. And as soon as we know more information, we'll talk about it and we'll spread it out over the next few months. But keep an eye on this, because you worked your whole life with an expectation of how it will end and about the comfort in which you will have as it begins to end. You made decisions on expectations of what might happen in 20 or 30 years. And as you have got closer to the dates when those financial decisions are about to pay off, the federal government looks like it is going to yet again move the goalposts. Now, they may say that it'll result in more at-home care. Well, as we've shown you, almost 50% of all of the complaints about aged care are about the home care facilities. It may well be a scenario where the amount of money that you have to give over to the private company that runs the aged care facility will start to go through the roof. The ability for you not to lose everything that you put in your home or superannuation, again, all of this is now up for grabs. Yet amazingly today, we can't find the aged care minister saying anything about this. Instead, this was just one of those reports that moves from one side of the desk to the other side of the desk, and the interpretation of people who watch this more than I do and that are smarter than me on this issue say that the government is probably going to put it in place. The federal government is looking at a federal budget deficit next year, so they'll be trying to find ways to save money. In fact, federal budget deficits are expected to get worse every year for the next 40 years. And a big part of that is going to be aged care. Watch this space. I apologise for the concern. I will update you when I know more. And we'll maybe have a chat to that organisation again a bit later in the week. Meantime, something we have to deal with here is about how people protest in Australia, what is acceptable and what is not. There is a story which much of the media wants to, again, pretend didn't happen, but there was a big resolution to it today and the court actually got it right. The person who they believe to be primarily responsible for the fires out the front of Old Parliament House, ones that we were told were lit because of a smoking ceremony getting out of control, but as a court has been able to conclude, the fire was well and truly being stoked on. Well, the person whom they believe to be responsible, a bloke by the name of Nicholas Reid, he's also known by several other names, he is going to jail. Now, as you know, there was millions of dollars of damage, but importantly, the message has now been sent that when you do this to any government-owned facility, there is a consequence. And in this case, when it is egregious as this, regardless of whatever excuse or cultural shield that you tried to put in and around your actions, you're still going to jail. This is what the justice had to say to this bloke as he was preparing to slot him for 23 months. The ACT Supreme Court Justice David Mossop said that Reid's actions had caused significant harm. The boundary between acceptable and unacceptable protests must be maintained. You need to recognise the very significant harm to the Commonwealth. Reid was then sentenced to 23 months in prison, but will only serve 8 months on the condition that he signs a 2-year good behaviour bond upon his release. Now, we can have a conversation whether 8 months is too little of the 23 months, but he's going to jail. And in a place that often loses its mind, like the ACT, and how bizarre the ACT legal system can be, to actually see consequences is something worth reporting to you tonight, that occasionally, every now and then, like a broken clock, sanity prevails at least twice a day in our legal system. When somebody wasn't able to argue all the different reasons of the boo-hoo as to why they did it, but instead they will be punished for what they did. Will they go to jail for the rest of their life? No. But should they have to explain to everyone for the rest of their life why they're not able to go to places like Disneyland because they have a criminal conviction for setting alight our former federal parliament? Yeah, probably. But it does bring us again to this idea, as the judge said here, that he needs to recognise the significant harm to the Commonwealth, but I search here again. The boundary between acceptable and unacceptable protests must be maintained. And sadly, that brings us to the ongoing difficulties of what's been happening on what feels like the other side of the world. But because of technology, 24-hour news, all the rest of it, it feels like we are living what is happening in the Middle East right now. But the fundamental reality is that the joy of Australia is that it is a long way away, and even when things are as difficult as they are playing out right now, the joy of distance is that we have to maintain that the war is there, not here. As you've heard, there have been protests today at the electorate office of the Defence Minister. I don't believe that this is acceptable. I don't believe that this is the sort of thing that is part of acceptable protest. After all, it happened in the foyer. People weren't able to get in there if they were constituents and they wanted to raise a matter with their local MP. If they wanted to do so out on the street, make their point, fine. If they wanted to go to a park, again, agree or disagree with their cause, that's where it happens. But as soon as you start to sit in and as soon as you start to, in my view, disrupt, then I'm sorry, do what the judge says here, and that is find the clear line about acceptable protests and unacceptable protests. One of the things that was said out the front of the Defence Minister's office.
I don't fully get the Palestinian situation at the moment, but I somewhat get it, you know what I mean? Like, we're subjected to similar stuff here in Australia. Stop providing arms and resources to Israel that are only going to be used to ethnically cleanse Palestinians.
Now, that's kind of part of the modern problem, right? I don't really understand it. It's not quite my fight, but I identify that it's a fight, so therefore there must be good guys and bad guys in all of this. Similarly, again, there has been debate about local councils flying the flag that represents the populations that are densely connected to Israel or Palestine. Now, the reality is that, again, whether you like it or not, people want their local councils to represent their views, and if it is a significant majority of the population, well, then their councils are going to bend. Why? Because they're politicians. But again, I bet you didn't hear about this today. Wallara Council, which has a very significant Jewish population, decided to fly the Israeli flag during this conflict. But somebody has stolen it. Somebody tore it off the flagpole and somebody has stolen it. That is not acceptable protest. Again, here's the council reacting to the story.
Yeah, the police are investigating. There is CCTV footage. The police are investigating. So if there are people out listening who think it's funny to do this, there is videos, there are cameras everywhere. The police are going to get you.
It is no one's job to pull down the national flag of countries that have significant populations that are feeling the pain about what is happening on the other side of the world because you disagree with their version of events. Again, you can be deeply involved, concerned, obsessed even about what is happening on the other side of the world. You can have a clear view about what Australia's role in it should be. But the joy of the freedom that we have in this country, the one that at some point in time all of us have a family member who decided to come and join and be part of, is that we adopt the idea that while we do not leave our history behind, we do not bring the ancient hatreds of wherever I am talking about here. And I'm not just talking about the Middle East, I'm talking about you name your politics and any country, and there would be, to some degree, a reason why someone wants to march in the streets. But the reality is that we have got to a dangerous place and we are in one now. Thank goodness there was a judge in the ACT today who knows the line between an acceptable and an unacceptable protest. Because there are too many judges around that say, if you want to be part of the doomsday cult that wants to block the roads for climate change, it's okay because you're full of anxiety. How long before a judge somewhere will turn around and say that a person who pulled down a flag out the front of the Canterbury Bankstown Council or the Wallara Council did it because of their deep-held beliefs? There is a very clear line here. It must be enforced by state, territory, local and all figures who care about Australia. And not Australia that's some crazy white pride thing, Australia that understands we all come from somewhere else. But we are united in how awesome it is to be here. Now, obviously, the voice debate is well and truly behind us, but the unpicking of the voice debate continues. And as you know, the result, very clear, 60% of Australians making it absolute that they didn't want it. Every place in the country, with the exception of some lefty Labor seats, the Teal seats and the ACT, said not just no, they said hell no. $450 million wasted. And of course, we've heard from Jacinta Price on the night. We heard from the Prime Minister on the night. But of course, that is not the final word. The people who were involved in all of this have obviously every right to start to have their say about what went right for the No campaign, what went wrong for the Yes campaign. But I want to show you what they did on Channel 2 last night. This was the 7:30 report, taking a few minutes of its national broadcast before it started to talk about the bushfires that have killed people in Queensland. By the way, is the Prime Minister planning to go there before he goes to Beijing? Of course not. That standard's only for the former Prime Minister. This is what they did last night with their airtime, trying to work out, for want of a better term, what went wrong.
When the Prime Minister committed to holding the referendum, about 2/3 of Australians backed the idea, but that support fell away rapidly. Amongst Indigenous leaders, there's now soul-searching about whether the Yes campaign was too slow and too ill-prepared for the debate that followed.
So what went wrong? That's the title that's on the YouTube video of that story, which you can watch tonight if you're bored enough. But the people that they spoke to, let me show you, includes this Yes campaigner, this Yes campaigner, this Yes campaigner, this Yes campaigner, and this Yes campaigner. And literally no one from the No campaign. A little hard to be honest when you're dissecting what went wrong if you only talk to one side of the question, including the people who got it so wrong for so long. But don't worry. The micro-messaging that goes back into the people who watch that show, who remain heartbroken by democracy, again, working in Australia, and the mob always gets it right, regardless of whether you like the result. That's the joy of democracy. Well, of course, all the buzzwords were there for about who to blame.
Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price.
You need bipartisanship.
After Dutton's announcement.
Bipartisan support to get a referendum up.
Peter Dutton.
And just in case that wasn't a big enough bogey, the 100% guest list of Yes campaigners, well, of course, they believe we need to censor the internet.
The disinformation.
The debate became a febrile fight, rife with misinformation.
Being dishonest to the Australian people to confuse them and to cause fear.
Now, I'm all well and good for the home game, that is the ABC, to attempt to find a way, not to lick its wounds, but to blame everyone else. But the reality is that you're not even trying if the only stuff you show of 50% of the argument is cuts and no interviews, no capacity for anyone to have any say post the debate. And remember, one of the many reasons why some people may have been shocked by the result of the referendum is because in much of the ABC's reporting, they never talked about the polls. You see, they thought they could just constantly pump with message and vibe because that was working. But then once the evidence started to come in that it wasn't, they never recognised it. So literally there were people sitting forward, leaning forward, because they thought that the result that they were hearing about on Radio National or watching on the ABC was definitely going to happen. Instead, if they had been given both sides of the argument and seen which one Australians were starting to connect with, the result wouldn't have been a shock. And interestingly, Laurie Oakes, who obviously is not active in politics anymore but was around Channel 9 for a long period of time, he had this assessment about the Prime Minister and the long-term wounds from leading the country through $450 million worth of a question he knew we were going to vote no to.
When you handle something as big as the Voice as badly as he handled it, people are naturally going to assume that you're not handling other things very well either. He's come out of this, the Voice referendum, looking like an incompetent dill, and he may be stuck with that.
He was promoting some book or something else, but interesting to know. All right, quick break, back with more. Great debate we've got for you this evening. If you want to join us, feel free to send me an email, which is paul@skynews.com.au. Now, I buried the lead. I should have opened the show with it, but I had all that stuff about aged care I wanted to get to. Tonight's No Sooks, No Lefties, and these are some of your favourite shows in the world. Two perfect examples of it. One is in Adelaide, and eventually he'll come to the Man Cave, is the lovely Corey Bernardi, but the man in the Man Cave is Michael Krager.
Hey, mate. Good to see you.
Hello.
Yeah, we're in sunny Sydney.
Indeed, you get to be the carryover champ now, so Corey, good luck getting a word in here. Now, before we get to more significant international matters and the big stuff about aged care, what about today? We started to learn the numbers about just how much money has been piddled against the wall in the Commonwealth Games that will never happen in Victoria, because the annual report was released today by the now defunct Commonwealth Games organisers. How's this? Victorian taxpayers have been slugged $11 million for staff who worked at this organisation, who of course were supposed to be there for many years but didn't end up obviously being needed, but they all got paid. Victorian taxpayers were slugged more than $11 million to pay the staff of the failed 2026 Commonwealth Games, including $500,000 for one bureaucrat in particular. The whopping salary was revealed in the annual report that showed 10 people got more than 300 grand and 32 people got more than 180 grand. And by the way, anyone who was part of the 13-member board to organise that ultimately wasn't needed, including the Richmond Football Club president, Peggy O'Neill, can you hand some money back, please? Because they've got $700,000 for the early organising of something that never happened. One board member took home $359,999. The other 12 got about 100 grand. 5 members got between $40,000 and $50,000. Now, you would think that someone might have to explain any of this, including the minister responsible for the Games and those contracts. But of course, Jacinta Allen's now the Premier and won't turn up to the Upper House inquiry.
What point are you trying to make here, Paul?
Dear God is what I'm trying to make here. $11 million bucks.
Quite seriously, there's got to be a point at which malfeasance in public office is a law which applies to these people that squander the public's money in a brazen and disgusting way and just walk away without a care in the world. No public company directors would survive this kind of scandal, this outrageous misuse of the middle-class taxpayers' money.
100%.
Yet these people just say, they thumb their nose at the public and move on.
But also, Corey, I love the way the system works, and the more I spend time looking at it, the more I hate it, right? So I understand why people who've been around it longer than me feel the way they do about it, right? And it's why so many young people get thrown into the system, because they, oh, isn't this wonderful? There's nothing wrong. There's plenty wrong here, right? Including, of course, remember, Daniel Andrews doesn't have to account for any of this because he's out of office. Oh, but he'll get a pension for the rest of his life. So he gets the money forever, but no responsibility once he hands the gun and the badge back.
Yeah, this is the thing that infuriates people, that politicians make bad mistakes. They cost taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars a year over the forward estimates in wasted money and crazy projects. And then they skate off into the sunset. They either get cosy jobs on the AAT they used to get, or made diplomats, or they've got the old pension scheme. In this case, I've learned now how Daniel Andrews managed to win elections. That was because he had so many people on the payroll in the public servants and all these well-paid jobs, they kept voting for him. And secondly, I understand why Victoria's broke, for exactly the same reason. This is a debacle, and malfeasance is exactly what it is, and heads should roll, but they won't.
Well, again, it's the selective outrage about these things, right? Like, you would think all of that is an ingredient for someone to lose a job somewhere, right?
No.
You would also think that there would be an ingredient when the Trade Minister picks a former one-term senator to be the trade representative for Australia in California for a job he didn't apply for, but somebody else applied for, was the preferred candidate. You would think that would be a scandal because that's normally the ingredient. So let's just take
Sometimes the roulette wheel lands on your number.
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
The luck, the endless luck. But again,
incredible luck.
They know the gallery ain't following
Not when I'm
right?
betting.
Because the gallery's still turning around trying to work out, how to put Humpty Dumpty back together again after the voice. Now, I went into chapter and verse at the start of the show, and again, my angle into this was the analysis of the Financial Review about these potential changes to aged care. Michael, again, it's like when they make changes to superannuation. There's something philosophically wrong here, which is that people make a decision that will pay off or have a consequence further down the road. When government turns around and changes it year on year, doesn't grandfather, it doesn't say this starts in 10 years from now, it ends up having huge financial consequences. Again, when I know more, I'll say more on telly, but there'll be some concerned people watching us tonight that, again, this user pay approach to aged care and the thresholds at which how much your house is worth, which is all great if you sell it, but again, it pushes to this idea that they're just going to change midstream when people have planned all their life for the end of it.
And don't forget, a lot of those people have already paid more in tax during the 50 years of their life where they've been paying higher proportions of their income because of the progressive tax scale, and now they're being asked to pay again. So, yeah, the aged care system is in a lot of mess, but the government's got to be very careful about continuing to penalise people who've already paid extra tax during their life by saying to them, you've got to pay more. Yes, of course, the assets test should apply, but they've got to be careful about triple taxing people, quite frankly.
And again, Corey, we know where the far left, the joy of the far left of politics is they don't hide what their actual philosophical belief is, right? That they don't believe in intergenerational wealth. So they believe in things like death taxes, all right? Oh, you couldn't possibly go to an election with that. But if we find a way to take every dollar somebody has either in their house or in their superannuation that will eventually end at zero or minus before death, well, then that's just the death tax by 1,000 cuts, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, Paul. And what we saw last week was the OECD came out and said we should be having death taxes in this country. And so at some point, the government will try and find a way in which they can engineer it under the guise of the OECD says this is what we need to do. We've got a problem here, and there is a crisis of confidence in government. Why would you be putting money into superannuation when the government thinks it's theirs? And at some point they're going to say, no, you can't take it out when you retire. You've got to take it on the pension. And when you die, it's ours. You can't pass it on to any beneficiary. That is coming down the pipe. We're encouraging people to save to buy a home and to invest outside of it so they can be self-sufficient. And yet the government wants to take all of that. What it's going to do is reduce people to saying, well, bugger it, why should I bother doing this? And it's going to become a bigger hassle in the long run. And that's the problem with this socialist approach, is that it's a disincentive for people to do the right thing. And they go, I'm not chipping in to pay for every other bludger. I'll become a bludger myself. And that's it's a recipe for disaster.
Well, don't forget, of course, we've talked many times, the left is again, they don't hide it, right? And they know they won't get called out for it. But remember the difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcomes. And Harris and Biden and Albo and Wong, they're all into the worldview that we all end up in the same place, which means things like these sorts of policies start to move through. But again, we will see.
But
go for
Paul, sorry to interrupt, Paul. Can I just say, Biden is filthy rich. Harris is filthy rich. Albo's got a superannuation scheme, which you would probably have to have $20 million in your super in order to do it, because it's an intergenerational one, by the way. Penny Wong, of course, is I don't know what super scheme she's on, but she's certainly not impoverished. These are very privileged people who have been living off the taxpayer their entire lives, and now they want the person who's provided for themselves to be punished for it. This is, rules for thee, not for me. It sucks.
These people didn't grow wealth, didn't create employment. These are people who just move the ball down the line for, the university politics and the rough edges getting knocked off it, but the central heart being where they're trying to go. Now, let's talk about these protests today. Again, I was really pleased to see on something that's nothing to do with what's happening in the Middle East, but still, again, a judge says the person sets fire to the front of Old Parliament House. There's a difference between acceptable and unacceptable protest. You're off to jail. Now, we have to do the same when it comes to what is happening on our streets and globally right now. Richard Marles' office shut down by people who self-admitted said they didn't know much about the actual issue, but they've felt good guys and bad guys, so take to the streets.
What a bunch of rabble. I noticed there was a group there that calls themselves Jews Against Fascists. I'd prefer Jewish organisations that say young people like these clowns, Jews Against Nazis. That'd be an organisation worth joining. What an absolute farce to go to Richard Marles' office and act this way. But mate, can I make a more serious point about the Middle East? And here's something which would change the whole international debate. So if anyone from the American Embassy in Canberra is watching, could they please pass this message back to the White House to save me ringing Joe? Because he keeps you on hold for too long.
I know. Because he can't walk up the steps.
Correct. What would happen, mate, if the United States President came out and called on Hamas to surrender to avoid any more bloodshed?
That's a good point.
Right? Hamas are going to lose. Right? Israel have no option but to exterminate Hamas. There cannot be a two-state solution. Biden comes out and says, Hamas, you are murderous barbarians. You represent nobody in Gaza. You haven't had an election since 2006. The pretense is over.
Get out of the way.
Get out of the way and save the lives of the human shields that you're allowing to be killed by, having tunnels underneath refugee camps and you living in the top. The British would then come out and call on Hamas to surrender. The French, the Canadians, the Germans, the Italians, the Australians.
Good point.
Right? Everyone, the international pressure would then be on Hamas to surrender. Now, of course, people sitting at home saying, but they're never going to do that. Well, that's what they said about the Nazis and the Japanese. Hamas would have to surrender because you might even get Bahrain or countries that absolutely hate Hamas more than we do, like Egypt, to join the chorus, to say Hamas should surrender. And then, of course, the debate becomes Israel have to keep going until Hamas surrenders. So Biden, who's been excellent on this so far, he's outperformed all expectations. The next stage in what Biden's got to do is shift this whole international debate, because we've got to stop treating Israel on the one hand and Hamas on the other hand as if they're two legitimate countries. We hear their views and we hear their views. No, these people are the scum of the earth, right? These people are the lowest form of human life, and the US president's been very good so far, but the next step is for the developed world and then the sensible people amongst the Arab nations to say, it's over. It's over.
I might have to interrupt this conversation with a break in a second, but Corey, I want to again ask you, because I can feel a little energy through the TV here, right? Let's see if I have a special mind meld ability here, right? Over the past 20 years... where people sit on the political spectrum and their view about being anti-war sometimes surprises, right? Where we certainly know that sort of the pretense of the left is, no war, but we also know that there are people like those that are in the US Congress right now that say, well, you know what, we're not going to fund Ukraine, that's a forever war, we've been through 20 of those, don't want to do that. There may well even be people watching us right now who say, look, okay, not another forever war, pull out, stop, all the rest of it here. Do you think that growing cohort of people, including in the right of American politics, also when it starts to meld with, there's some numbers I'll give you after the break about Arab Americans who say they're just going to not vote at the next election if Biden continues to be pro-Israel. Do you see this as, again, a potential series of roadblocks to either what Michael's talking about or being what some people's expectations are about how America in particular responds to moments like this when a country is attacked by terrorists?
Paul, I'm one of those people now on the right who are opposed to war. I just think it's horrific, and I think a lot of the time it's engineered, it's not avoided, and it's not de-escalated when the opportunities are there. I think Ukraine and Russia we've got enough evidence that that's the case. I do believe this is slightly different in the sense that we had a terrorist outfit that is not a legitimate government, is not another country, has gone in and butchered and slaughtered some innocents on the basis that they happen to be Jews. And I think they do. The Jewish state, Israel does have a right to take out the terrorist outfits, but that's not to say we need to have, an international war going on like we saw in Iraq, like we're now seeing in Ukraine and Russia. I think to fuel these things is crazy. We've got to look for ways off. But I'm also going to say I think this plays out through the lens of domestic politics. You're seeing that in Israel as well as you'll see it in some of the Arab nations, and you're seeing it in America. Joe Biden loves and needs more distractions than he can have. You've got a bunch of people there who are making enormous amounts of money through encouraging wars, and I think they're doing a huge disservice to America, and I think they're doing a huge disservice to the world. And that's not to say I don't agree with everything that Michael Kroger said previously about Joe Biden's strength in this. I just think we've got to start looking for an off-ramp.
All right, so apparently there are 3.5 million self-described Arab Americans in the United States. This poll came out from the Arab American Institute, and it says support for Biden has gone from 59% before the war to now 17% because of his position on Israel. Again, just stepping back from the morality here, base politics is base politics. 3.5 million people, that's significant a drop, depending on the state. Do these sorts of things, do you think that this will start to colour Biden's worldview at all?
By the way, who's the candidate against Biden that they would then vote for?
Well, presumably they just don't vote.
Right.
They're hardly walking across to Trump.
Because there's another candidate. What was his name?
I'm pretty sure Trump's not going to be doing well in
Donald
that.
Trump, that's it.
Yeah.
They can vote for Donald. Well, I'd simply say this. There are times in political life, Paul, where if you're going to go down with honour.
Yeah, if you go down for the right reason as opposed to the pander.
If Biden lost because Palestinian supporting Arabs who go to rallies holding the PLO flag and signs saying from the river to the sea, if you lose the presidency because you lose the votes of those things, well, what a great way to be defeated, to go down with honour and respect. And Biden would be, if that was the reason he lost against the Orange Man, Biden would be revered forever, forever. There is principle in defeat occasionally.
Correct.
And this would be the greatest principle to die on politically. And I'm sure Joe Biden would think to himself, am I going to lose for that reason? I'm happy to lose.
All right, quick break. Back with more, lots more to talk about. These guys for the rest of the night. No sooks, no lefties. I'm loving that you're watching tonight. Thank you for doing so. No sooks, no lefties, just the way you like it. Here is Corey Bernardi and Michael Kroger in the Man Cave right now. So, Laurie Oakes, doyen of politics, blah, 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 but let's be honest, bit of a lefty. He did say this today about the Prime Minister, though, in the wake of The Voice. This is what he had to say, of course, to Deborah Knight, where he basically said the Prime Minister, the sort of stench of incompetence may stick around, Commodore 64 not working, so I'll act it out for you. He's really incompetent. Anyway, so, Corey, do you think that Australians perhaps have broken up with the great mind meld of the Prime Minister? The polling that came out from The Essential via The Guardian, 2PP right now, is 48-46, the rest undecided, in favour of Labor, but that's close. Primary vote of Labor now 32%, Libs 34%, Greens down 4 to 10. Is something changing, or are we again talking here in the scenario of majority versus minority because Albo will find a way?
Paul, I think something is changing because this was a catastrophic defeat for the Prime Minister. He was exposed as being just the flim-flam man. He didn't have any idea of the detail. He's chosen ministers like Bernie who are clearly incompetent and have no idea themselves. And it's turned the minds of the Australian people. Well, if they can't sell something that they've been planning for and promised, what hope have they got of saving our bacon? And then we've been warned about blackouts and brownouts, inflation pressures, which finally the media are starting to wake up to the fact that this is driven by immigration and it's going to make things worse. Interest rates are likely to go up again, so on. All of this is because of government inaction or government action. And the buck has to stop somewhere, and there'll be plenty in Labor who'll be happy for it to stop with the Prime Minister because they want to get rid of him. But there'll be plenty on the Liberal side who'll be taking some heart from it and thinking that Peter Dutton, finding his mojo, going against the Voice, now railing against some of the immigration issues and the wind farms and all of that, maybe the Liberal Party's getting back to its knitting. I just hope they do it if they win government as well as they do it in opposition.
Correct. Again, Michael, just about political judgment right now, we've seen the Prime Minister barrel on arrogantly $450 million, all right? We're going to see, he's going to stand up to China, but the reality was China held Australia up and they got the result that they wanted. But also, the judgment of Dutton here, right, said no to the Job Summit, said no to the Voice, saying no to these wind farms being rolled out, and even, again, in that lefty Guardian poll, 50% of people are pro-nuclear now.
Dutton surprised everybody. He's done very well. He's certainly outperformed. Dutton is, thank goodness, talking to the working middle class. And that's where he gets a majority in the next election if he can. Albanese is not. Albanese has abandoned his base. He's talking to some elements of the socialist left, i.e. the Voice, and he's up there, with the hoi polloi. I haven't got many predictions wrong in the last few years on your show. I don't think I've got any wrong. So here's another one, right? Write this down.
Writing.
Albo is certain to lose his majority at the election, okay? So he's on 78 seats.
Yes.
You've got to have 76 for a majority. There's 151 seats in the reps. Can he lose more than 3? He's certain to lose more than 3. He's going to lose 2 to 4 in Western Australia.
Correct.
He'll lose 2 to 3 in New South Wales. He'll lose Lyons in Tasmania. He'll lose Aston in Victoria, probably Higgins in Victoria. He's down to 70. Whether and pretty well all those goes to Dutton, so he gets into the high 60s. That's the good news. You know what the bad news is?
Yeah, minority lefty.
You're going to have a
madness.
minority. You're going to have minorities in both, which means you short the all ordinaries because the Australian stock market is going to decline if you have governments with a minority in both houses.
I'm with you on that prediction right now, is that I think that's the case. I also think the Greens might get one in southeast Queensland, but see where it all goes. I know. Thank you very much. Thank you, lads. No sooks, no lefties. Stick around. We'll chat after the show. Corey, if you can get here, it'd be nice. All right. Plenty more to say before we're done here tonight. About 5 minutes away from the late debate. All right. Now, people always try to find new ways to make money out of you, and I'll be honest, that's what I think this story is, but let's go from the way that we were all told about it today. Apparently there's a way to add technology to your grave. Seriously. Story around today that there's apparently a whole bunch of people who are putting QR codes on their headstones so that anyone who's walking past will be able to watch a video, hear the voice, I don't know, have you singing My Way. But I actually had a little look into this. And again, good luck to you if this is something that you've done as a beautiful way of honouring someone. But the company that actually does this is called QRIP Memories. So I actually went online today and I worked out how much does it cost for you to add a QR code on your tombstone. $650, where you would also have a QRIP medallion where you'd be able to carry around the images that presumably are already in your phone, but still, you'd have your own login thing. Okay, well, what about package 2? That's for $750, where they'll also throw in a CD, a DVD, or they'll give you a USB stick of the stuff that's presumably already on your phone. Or price on application for bespoke videos or slide presentations at your direction, which we can create a truly unique presentation that can even be set to a favourite piece of music. What the hell is going on? And I'm just trying to imagine, right, this is an amazing piece of technology now, but imagine like in 200 years, and they're walking past, one of the many, many monuments to Liz Storer that will be built. But you're going past there, and there's this little dotty thing in the corner, and kids who don't have phones anymore will just be going, "What's that, Grandpa?" "Well, let me tell you about the QR codes of 2020. Oh, it's how we kept track of everything, including what dead people liked."